Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. In manufacturing, we throw around the word burnout, right? We talk like, hey, I'm just feeling burnout, and not really thinking of it as a clinical term, just more of a feeling and not really knowing how to gauge that. But we do know that we get tied into a 5-day operation, which turns into a 6, which turns into a 7, which turns into phone calls at night. There's many different industries in manufacturing, and this kind of ties into our mindfulness. So I looked up, what is really burnout? And the World Health Organization has declared this as actually a workplace syndrome. And if you're feeling a little burnout, then maybe this will be interesting for you. But I had to learn more, and I always learn more through friends. And Nina Nesdoly, she is an academic in management and neuroscience, 2 of my favorite topics, but they're not really tight together. But as she combines them and with her language, she's helping companies solve that problem of workplace burnout. And welcome, Nina.
Hi, Trevor. Thank you so much for having me.
So instead of me fumbling through the definition of like, what is it really? How are we defining whether this is just a feeling or an actual syndrome?
So for the definition, as you mentioned, the World Health Organization defines burnout as an occupational phenomenon, and it results from chronic work stress that hasn't been successfully managed. Burnout has 3 dimensions. So when we're thinking about what burnout is versus just being tired or just being stressed in the moment, these 3 dimensions are what really help us to know burnout versus something else. The first is emotional exhaustion. So that's the feeling that you are just run down, constantly tired, getting a good weekend away or a good night's sleep, it doesn't help. You're still tired. You can't really apply yourself anymore. You might even get unexplained physiological symptoms like little headaches or tension in your neck because your body is storing stress and it makes you exhausted.
And I'm feeling like Monday's coming too fast.
Yeah, exactly. You get the Monday scaries. The second is cynicism and depersonalization. And that's when you start to become very pessimistic, very distrustful, and you withdraw from and pull away from other people. So how we see this in the workplace is things like someone that you work closely with, or maybe a client or someone from another project that you need to interact with, that once upon a time you got along with, now you're like, can't really stand this guy. Or even if someone in your team tries to help and support you, like they mean well, you're like, well, I'll be the judge of that attempt to be supportive. Like you're just cynical. You don't trust it.
I think of when I go into a plant and I say, how's it going? Living the dream.
Yeah.
Could that be cynical?
That's the one. Yeah, that's the expression for you guys.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that like sarcastic, you're like living the dream. But there's this withdrawal and this hesitation to connect with other people because you don't want to waste your energy on it because you're so burnt out. And the third one is reduced professional efficacy. It's one of the, I think, most difficult ones to spot in yourself. And it also creates the loop phenomenon of burnout because with reduced professional efficacy, you start to feel like you're not good enough and like your work isn't good enough. And so when what you really need is to step back and focus on taking care of yourself, you try to compensate, you try to push yourself harder and make up for it because you feel like you're failing.
I have not used that term, professional efficacy, in my life, but the way you're describing it, is that kind of like when we're just pushing through something?
So professional efficacy is your belief in your own ability in relation to your work. So if you feel like you have efficacy in your job, then you feel that you're able to do it. You're able to meet the demands. You're able to respond to things that are going on in your environment. You have a sense that you are competent in your work. So if you're dealing with reduced professional efficacy, then it's the opposite of that. You do not feel like you can attend to your job demands. You feel that you can't deal with stuff that comes up. And you might have this sense that you're getting bad at your job. So when I talk to people who are dealing with burnout, that's something I hear from them a lot. And it's so hard to spot in yourself. So they try to like explain it to me. They'll be like, no, you don't understand. I am getting worse at my job. Like, I really doubt that.
Yeah, you're pushing yourself to get everything done. You're not getting everything done. Then you're thinking, well, maybe I'm just not as effective anymore. And maybe this just starts, self-doubt easily can creep into all our minds.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that kind of leads to burnout. Then then because it's hard to get out of that cycle is what you're saying.
It is hard to get out of that cycle because we try to compensate for it.
And we compensate it by what? Just working harder through it or working more hours and kind of feeding that more, Nina?
All of the above. When you start to feel like you're not living up to the expectations that are set for you, it can be really difficult to recognize that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is actually rest. Instead, our inclination is to make up for things that we perceive as shortcomings or as us failing or not being good enough. So it might be longer hours. It might be working harder, which often just involves like stressing out more. Not actually working harder in some way. And then it contributes to this cycle because we're wearing ourselves down even more.
Yeah. So there's got to be some neuroscience around putting in more hours. When you're in that state, you probably get less done.
You do. Yeah, you do. And there's a couple ways that comes into play. So stress and burnout are two different things. So stress is your response to demands in your environment. It is the activation of your nervous system, your psychological response, your physiological response to things in your environment. Burnout is a consequence of a lot of stress chronically over time. So just differentiating those two. And so neither of those things, stress or burnout, is great for performance for the most part. So in the short term, if you're stressed, if you're in a state where you are highly stressed and very tense, then what your body does is divert energy away from cognitive functions and any of the processes that you need for your job for the most part, and instead towards survival functions. So I like to compare it to biking with a flat tire because I once did that. I was in a road race and I accidentally rode 7 miles, I think would be the American conversion, 12 kilometers on a flat tire. I was completely convinced that it was just me and I needed to work harder, but the bike tire was in fact flat. And it was really difficult. So I was still moving, but it's like all of this energy wasted. And that's what happens when we're working, when we are extremely stressed, extremely overwhelmed. Now, on the flip side of that, when we see, like athletes or performers, sometimes there are professions, and if you're like really getting in the flow with your work, where people can kind of capitalize on stress and really make it their friend and use it. For the most part, if we're talking about stress that is very negative and very overwhelming, then it's probably not doing us any favors to be stressed out while we're trying to work. And then with burnout, what happens is that over time, the brain will change and it becomes more difficult to regulate your own emotions and to regulate your own stress response. So then again, like you said, it gets harder to do everything.
Man, that sounds like manufacturing because I get the whole neuroplasticity, and we've talked about that in some previous episodes where you can shape your brain, one way or the other. I mean, I guess that if we want to talk impermanence, we're always changing. We're always evolving with every new experience. But if we're, constantly in that stress, which is going to kind of drive that burnout, well, now I'm kind of used to that. And that's where we get into that. This is just, the way it is. And then we don't know how to get out of it because the plant's still running 7 days a week and we're having a hard time stepping out. So probably the question I think the listeners would be wondering right now, it's like, okay, I'm driving into the plant. It is running 7 days a week. I'm relating some of the stuff that Nina's saying, but I still got to go in because we're running this plant today and I still got to be there. What can I do, Nina?
So there's a few things, fortunately, like you're not stuck. There's lots that we can do. So, I mean, the first piece and what we've talked about so far is the recognition, like taking a look at your state, recognizing that you're stressed, that you are potentially burnt out or heading towards burnout. Once you've got that, it becomes a matter of 3 things. First, and we can dive more into each of these. The first is really evaluating where you're putting your energy and what you are expending. We can do a lot of different things at work. We can take a lot of different approaches, but there's always this point of diminishing return. So, in some businesses, they talk about a minimum viable product. And this is the product that has the minimum features possible before you can get an early user testing it out. And although we don't always want to do the absolute bare minimum, it's worth asking ourselves, what are the minimum criteria and standards that we need to meet in our work versus where are places where maybe we've added some self-imposed pressures or rules or just things that we've made up. And I do this to myself all the time. A couple of weeks ago, I decided I was going to write a little ebook that I could just share with people on TikTok. And when I tell you that I tortured myself with this ebook for a week, I put it on my schedule where I clearly did not have time for it. I proceeded to just move it around every day from morning to afternoon, and all week. I was like, I have to write this ebook.
Yeah.
No, I don't. No, that was something I decided that I wanted to do. No one knew that I was planning to write this thing. So if I never wrote it, no one was even going to find out. And so that's a great place to start, is looking at these places where maybe we've added a lot of pressure. And sometimes it's just in our own thinking that we're carrying it around. Other times it's on our to-do list. And the great thing about looking for, what is the minimum standard of work that we need versus where have we added things, we can also go talk to other people about that. We can say, hey, we've come up with this and X, Y, Z, bees, zebras, giraffes, things that we're going to add on this project. And I think maybe we lost sight of what our minimum criteria is that really needs to get done. We've got people stressing out about all of these different things. Can we take a look? Can we rein it back? Can we make sure that we're using our energy effectively?
And there's some, even, I'm just thinking of that science around just telling somebody else, just having more human connection. How does that tie into the science? Because I know there's got to be something bonuses there too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like I've opened a lot of different doors we can go down now. So let's talk human connection, and then I'll talk about the other two things that you can do to address.
I got too many questions.
Burnout. I know, right? I have too much to talk about. It's great. So with talking to other people, with connecting with other people, it's such a powerful way to address stress and burnout because our bodies are really wired for it. So one of the really amazing things that happens is that when you experience stress, when your body is responding to stress, your cortisol levels go up. That's your stress hormone. Your adrenaline might go up. But the other thing that goes up is your oxytocin. And oxytocin is our social bonding hormone. So when you're stressed, your body is actually giving you a little push to go connect with other people. And oxytocin is really recognized as social bonding, the cuddle hormone. It's, some people call it the love hormone, but it's also just part of social connection. And the cool thing that oxytocin does is it helps to subdue the stress response. So oxytocin increases in your body. It prompts you to go out and find other people and find social connection. And when you find that social connection, that'll help contribute further to your oxytocin. And then oxytocin at the same time is helping to decrease the stress in your body.
Oh man, we need more of that dialogue in manufacturing. Because I can totally see that, right? Like, what is it that I've just put on my plate that I just need to do this now? And I'm relating it just like you and I are in a speaker's class together with Rogue Public Speaking, and just hearing you talk about your progress and reading through your speech and kind of where I'm at, it's just made me feel better. And it actually just gave me like some permission to be where I'm at. Like, oh, okay, Nina's there too. And then it propelled me with this motivation of like, okay, we can do this together, right? We can both go focus on this because this is the important part that's going to get us that result. And I can see these conversations in manufacturing just saying, what happens if we don't do that? Because if we say yes to this, we got to say no to something else. And that just creates wonderful conversations.
I love that you brought up the saying yes versus saying no. Because what I mentioned a few minutes ago, like there's 3 things we've got to do to address burnout. That's the third one.
Ooh.
It's saying no so that you can say yes. So, and I'm going to plug you in here. We're going through an acronym. We're recognizing when we're overextended. And then we talked about evaluating our efforts. So that's our E. And now we're on S, which is saying no so you can say yes.
Well, here's the podcast host kind of, moving it around. We're going to leave great show notes.
We are.
But
we're gonna spell a word here. It's gonna be exciting. So that's our third thing is we've got to look at, okay, what do we have on our plate? And there's places where it's about adjusting our effort level and our energy and what we're doing. But sometimes it's about saying no and saying no intentionally rather than letting things fall. Because although saying no can feel really intimidating, if we're overloaded, then that's what's going to happen. Something is going to fall through the cracks and we don't get to decide what it is if we wait until that happens. Whereas if we intentionally look at what we're doing and decide what we say no to, then we have that control. We have a say in how we're going to proceed. And when we've said no to superfluous work and tension by finding ways to communicate with each other and to projects and overexertion that doesn't serve us, it puts us in a position to say yes to the things that really matter and that are really important to us.
So we got to go back now because there's an evaluating part of like, what are you saying yes or no to? And I think I skipped us past that. So take us back, Nina.
So when you're deciding what to say yes or no to, it really comes down to goals. And one of the things that tends to happen with goals, both in our personal lives and in organizations, is we are often making decisions based on an initial goal. And sometimes the goals change, but we're still stuck on the same trajectory. You talked about coming in and it's day 1, then it's day 4, day 5, day 7, day 9. Do we have the same goals on day 9 as we did on day 1? Because if we don't, we've got to take a look at what we're doing and where are we currently putting time, energy, attention that maybe it's time to say no. Maybe that's no longer aligned with the goals that we have. And on a, kind of larger scale, if we think about people's lives and careers more broadly, I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day that I thought encapsulated this so well. Someone said she was in a career coaching session and she's 45 years old. And the therapist said to her, "What do you want?" And she started describing her life goals and her career goals. And the therapist stopped her and said, no, not what did 22-year-old want? Not what did 22-year-old version of you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
Now, because it's different. And that's where that saying no really comes into play. It's okay, what are the current goals, values, objectives that we're trying to achieve? And if they align with the objectives of our work, our organizational goals, and also our personal goals, our career goals. And if they don't, having the courage to say no.
I know what's going through my mind right now. And I think the listeners will be doing the same thing. We're all evaluating, well, hold on a minute. What are my goals right now? Yeah. And do I need to start reevaluating a little bit? And
sometimes you do. The other thing you can do is start to practice saying no. So, saying no to really big things in work, in life, it can be intimidating. So start saying no just to little things sometimes. If someone says to you, "Hey, I really loved that new Guardians of the Galaxy movie," and you didn't, I did not. I just thought I didn't like it. Rather than falling into the trap of thinking that we have to like exactly the same things as everybody else to connect, saying, "No, I didn't actually enjoy it. I'm curious to hear what you enjoyed about it, but I didn't." Or it might be saying no to checking your email for the first 30 minutes when you get out of bed. So you put these kind of low stakes ways to practice saying no and having some boundaries into your life. And then when the bigger things come up, you've built up that muscle a little bit. You've built up that familiarity with saying no.
I can see that with tasks. I can see that with relationships. So many areas that if you can keep your step back for a moment, if you're feeling burnout, and then kind of look at, well, what is my longer goal? Does this serve me now? And then if someone is stuck in that I'm saying yes situation. So what's the language that they need to use when they feel like saying no, but they feel like they're going to say yes? What do they say to that person?
So sometimes it helps to buy yourself time. So there's a technique called the 24-hour rule. And basically, if you feel like you're going to say yes, no matter what someone says to you, stop trying to get yourself to say no in the moment. Because when you're faced with the other person, when they're right in front of you, when that request is right in front of you, if you're struggling with that pressure and you're so accustomed to always saying yes to whatever people ask of you, it's going to feel so foreign and it's really hard to overcome our habits in the moment. So instead, say, thanks so much for asking. I will get back to you in 24 hours.
And at that point, do you let them know that, hey, I'm trying to, I say yes to everything. I really got to evaluate this because I'm feeling overwhelmed? Or yeah, I guess
you can. If you've got, relationship with that person where you feel like you can let them know what you're working on, go for it. But you can also just buy yourself a little bit of time so you can, in the next half of the day or in the evening or something like that, say, okay, this request came up. I'm feeling really pressured by it. And you can kind of check in and say, but here are my goals. Here are my values. Here's what I'm working towards. It really doesn't align. So even rehearse what you want to say when you go in tomorrow. So you're going to do it politely. And maybe it's not a full 24 hours. Maybe it's just end of day. But buy yourself a little bit of buffer time just to give yourself a chance to wrap your head around saying no to someone.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you because I believe if we polled the listeners, that most people wouldn't like my idea of saying, I'm just overwhelmed, I'm working on this. Most people would be like, yeah, I don't want to say that. It really, that's going to be a closer relationship. That's going to be different. So if we've said, last one was your boss. What if it's your boss and it just keeps on coming up and that boss expects you to say yes?
If your boss expects you to say yes to things, so
and your boss is the one that's asking, like
the same request over and over again,
or it just keeps coming, right? Like we've talked about this, right? Like what's the language to use if it's your boss's? No, I've asked you to do this. And you're thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail because I'm feeling more stressed and I'm going to be more burnout and I'm going to be able to do less. And they're going to ask for something again tomorrow. How do I stop it?
So there are ways to say no to a boss without actually saying no. And that might look like instead letting your boss know that in order to accommodate their request, you're going to need to shift something else off your plate. So you can let them know if your boss is coming to you with a request and you've said you can't do it and they come back to you, same request, and you're like, well, I'm at capacity. I cannot fit this in. And your boss says, this is really important. This has to get done. You say, okay, here are the other things that I've got. Here's what would maybe need to be put aside. Can I put this on the back burner? What can move? What can shift? So you don't have to sit there. I think that's one of the things with saying no. We're like, well, we're going to just say no to everybody. No. With workload and with work, it's a conversation. Part of connecting at work is we're saying no, and that's the way that we're summing it up. But it's a discussion at work, and especially with a manager, it's having a conversation about what the priorities are, what the goals are, what the values are, and what we're trying to accomplish, so that you're not saying no, you're saying, how can I best help us work towards our goals? Does that look like working on this project right now? Yeah. Or does it look like moving that one to the side so that I can say yes to this request that you've just come to me with?
That is fantastic. I know there's someone that's going to try that's listening to that. So we got recognizing, evaluating, saying no.
So we are spelling rest. Here's our T. Our T is take care of yourself. Recognize, evaluate, say no so that you can say yes, and take care of yourself. When we get burnt out, when we get stressed and overwhelmed, the inclination, like we talked about at the beginning with reduced professional efficacy, is often to work harder to overcome that. But what the neuroscience shows us is that rarely works. Because if you start doing things like not sleeping, your brain is literally getting filled up with biological garbage. So it makes everything difficult. If you don't have any opportunities in your day to relieve stress, you're walking around with all of this extra tension. If you don't make time to connect with your team or your family or your friends, you're missing out on your oxytocin and these opportunities to biologically cope with stress and also get their input and their insights and their feedback and their help. So even when it feels impossible and it feels overwhelming and it feels like a lot, I promise you, and the science says, keep taking care of yourself, because that is what is going to allow you to address demands in your work and in your life.
I'm going to be sending this out to all my engineers that love the science. That's why I love your language, Nina, and how you kind of pull in just, hey, here's some practical, and then here's some science to back it up. Because I visit many different manufacturing plants, and it's usually hectic. And they're like, oh, yeah, but this is just happening this week. And I'm like, there is something different happening last time, but it was about the same level of pressure. Like, this is just your plan. Like, this is just your life. So if you're waiting for that moment, listen to Nina and know that you got to invest now. It's like, well, I just got to get through these expenses and I'll save money next time.
I love that you're saying this, because one of the things I tell people with the R, the recognizing, is, these dimensions of burnout that we talked about at the beginning, the exhaustion, the cynicism, the reduced professional efficacy, they're really hard to spot in ourselves. So instead, there's these little like cheat sheets, kind of tricks you can use. And one of my favorites is, I just need to make it until. People are like, I just got to get through this week. I just got to get to Christmas. I just got to finish this project. I just got to get through this paperwork. I'm like, you just got to retire and move to the mountains, because none of this is working for you.
I was talking to one leader about personal development. He's got, when I'm done my tasks, because we got to run the business. Oh, there's science around this, really.
And there's always going to be something that you just need to make it to, unless you slow down, unless your team slows down, unless the organization makes changes. There's always going to be something. That's the way work works in our world. It keeps coming. It's the worst part about graduating high school. Like, nobody gives you summers off anymore. You just always have to work.
Yeah. So we might as well get used to that. We are wrapping up here, but I cannot end this episode because I heard you talk when I'm coaching clients in manufacturing. There's this phenomenon going on of they turn their phones down, but then they're looking at their watches. And it's like, I remember the first time I heard about this watch and notifications, and it's like now it's to the point where we got to take our watches off. And just bring us home here on this last tip around sensory information.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought this up. Our brains are constantly trying to predict what's going to happen next. And one of the big ways that we do that is by processing sensory information from our environment. So the things that we see, that we smell, that we taste, even that we feel, our clothes on our skin, that's input for your brain that your brain is trying to make sense of. Your brain is perceiving and interpreting your world. And then your brain says, well, this is what's going to happen next, or this is the state that we should be in. So when you're talking about the watches, these are notifications. This is a cue to pay attention to something else. We have so many different notifications now. They're coming from all these different places, and it splits up our attention. And people really underestimate the cost associated with that, because multitasking doesn't exist. But task switching does. And that's when you're forcing your brain to switch from one thing to another, and it consumes a lot of energy. Mm-hmm. But when you're going back and forth between notifications, trying to tune back into the meeting, it's physically demanding on your brain. You're dividing your attention. You are hurting your ability to pay attention over the long term. I think we've really underestimated just how much sensory information we're exposed to in a day and how responsive we are to it. So yeah, you put your phone down, but now you've got your watch, and it's going to pull you in just as much. If you really want to find some peace or pay attention, I don't even have notifications turned on my phone, except for phone calls. It buzzes for a phone call, but I'm a millennial, so very few people call me. If they call me, it's probably important, so it's fine. But for social media, for even text messages, there's no sound, there's no buzz. I see the alert when I pick up my phone, when I decide to engage with it, and not before.
I need the listeners to email me if you want another episode with Nina here, because I think this is a whole other podcast. Because just listening to you, it's kind of like, yeah, sometimes when I get that buzz, it's like I feel like a dog that's just being buzzed. All of a sudden, okay, now my heart starts going a little faster. Oh, I wonder what that text is. And it's probably something about this. And then, there's no way I could interview you on this podcast and have notifications going off. I can hardly do it. I can hardly, walk and take a notification and process all that.
It's such an important topic that you brought up here too, because I think that people feel a pressure to do it because there is so much information coming in, and we feel like we're pulled in all of these different directions. And somehow there is this myth that we should be able to attend to everything, that we should be able to respond to everything and get everything done. But our brains are really not designed for that. According to neuroscience, you can focus on one thing at a time. So you be intentional, and you look for ways to ideally not split your attention into a million pieces.
For all my manufacturing friends out there, you do own this, like, because we respond to these texts, and in manufacturing, it's getting like, I'm really concerned because there's this expectation, not only in work, but outside of work, where you should answer that text. You should know the details of what's going on, but you're a high level leader. So then I should know. Now I got to call here. Now I'm not focused on making a continuous improvement because someone just texted me asking about something I don't know about. So I'm going to text somebody else. Instead, I think we just need to be intentional in manufacturing and say, listen, I'm going into the meeting. I'm going to have my phone off. I'm going to have a conversation with this person. I'll check my messages after. If it's an emergency, you can come into the room, or I'm going to have the ringer on and it's going to have to ring twice before it goes off. So if it's an emergency, but when I'm with you, Nina, I want to be fully present. So can you help me do that with this person? And maybe we could all start doing that. So I think it doesn't start with the CEO or the general manager. It starts with one listener who's driving into work today that's going to start setting the example. So, wow, this was good, Nina. My friend from Ottawa, where she's starting with corporations at the capital of Canada. And how do our listeners learn more about you, follow you?
I am on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is my business name, which is Workplace Clarity. I'm also on LinkedIn at Nina Nesdoly, and you can find me online. I do speaking and training programs, so I am available for conferences and events. I'm also available to come in, work with your organization, go through everything we've talked about today in so much detail, help your teams put it into practice, create routines, create frameworks, and start making organizations healthier, more balanced, more enjoyable places to work.
Well, I just feel more enjoyable working with you, Nina. So I would definitely, I think manufacturing needs you, and we can't do it alone. We need different experts, and I'm just excited for the field that you're working in, kind of like you're getting in front of this, because it's going to keep rolling, right? If we don't, we got to do something different. And I'm just grateful that you're part of our community and to have met you. And thanks so much for so much information that they're going to have to follow you, because there's a lot more going on. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Trevor.
Hey, folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.